Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Zandi, the Chief Economist of Moody's Analytics, and I'm joined by my trusty co-host, Cris. Hey, Cris.
Hey, Mark. How you doing?
You. Good. And my two good friends, a longtime Inside Economic podcasters. Good to have you back, both Jared Bernstein and Jim Parrott. Hi, guys.
Hey, Mark. Hi, Cris.
And I should introduce you. Jared is the former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. Before that, a number of different think tanks around Washington. And today, you're a prolific writer, commentator, economist on Substack. If you're not watching Jared on Substack, you should. Is that right, Jared? Did I have that right?
Yeah, and it's free. So there you go.
It's free for the time being.
You get what you pay for. And I'm a policy fellow at Stanford Institute for Economic Policy and the Center for American Progress.
And you're out in Stanford right now.
I am. I'm at Palo Alto, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a little early. Thanks for coming on. I know it's a little early for you. I appreciate that. And Jim is everything housing and housing finance. Jim was a housing advisor to the Obama administration back when GSE reform was at the top of the list of policy items that were under consideration. And now, Jim, you have your own firm, consulting, providing advice to a broad array of folks in the housing ecosystem. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's true. That nebulous title is indeed a good description of my nebulous professional existence.
And of course, you and I and Jared have done a lot of work, a lot of research, written a few papers over the years, and it's good to have you back on. A lot going on today, guys.
Really?
Yeah. I think Jared said it right, drinking from a fire hose. But right before we came on, this is now Friday morning, February 20th, the Supreme Court just ruled that the president's tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs that were done under the IEEPA legal justification are not legal. They're not constitutional and struck them down. Maybe Jared, can I turn to you? You want to fill in the blanks there? How do you feel?
Yeah.
A sense you feel like this is a good thing.
I was about to start applauding. I think this is a good thing. Now, look, we're going to get into the economics of this, and I think sweeping tariffs are terrible economics, especially if you're concerned about affordability and pressure on prices. But obviously, tariffs are a tax on imports. But I got to tell you that my first thought was a rule of law thought. The idea that had the Supreme Court not decided this way, it would have been just a terrible signal for, I think, the rule of law and democracy, because not a lawyer, but it was really clear that the administration had overstepped its bounds with these, quote, reciprocal tariffs. I mean, remember, the word tariff never appears in the IEEPA, in the Emergency Act that they were using. And yeah, they designated the trade deficit as an emergency. We've had a trade deficit of about the size of it is now since the mid-1970s. So it was complete BS. The Supreme Court did the right thing. This isn't over. There's what do we do with the firms who paid all these tariffs? How can they claim restitution? The administration has other paths it can go down. But yeah, this is a stand up and applaud moment.
So a bunch of stuff comes up as a result of this. I mean, do you think President Trump will let this stand? And there's a lot of different ways he can take this. I mean, what's your sense of that, how he's going to respond?
I suspect his thumbs are working at about 200 miles per hour right now on, what is it called? Truth Social. So, he'll do his thing. But, maybe I'd be interested in others' view on this. I have not seen this administration go to the Supreme Court and say, screw you, we're going to do whatever we want. Right? That seems to me to be a line they've yet to cross. So we'll see, but I don't think he, starts firing Supreme Court justices, but I'm nervous about it.
Well, this is real money, right? I mean, the effective tariff rate by our calculation, and that's the you take all the tariff revenue that's being generated, divided by the value of the imported goods that are subject to tariff, is about 12%. So for context, a year ago, before all this started, we were at 2%. Now we're at 12%. Let's say rounded 10 percentage points. Also, our calculation, if because of the Supreme Court decision and the striking down of the reciprocal tariffs, there's other tariffs that are done under other legal justification. The effective tariff rate goes down to 5 or 6%. So effectively cuts the effective tariff rate in half.
Amazing.
Which, if you don't like tariffs, that's why you're applauding, and why, make.
Well, wait a second. Let me add an addendum. I would not say I don't like tariffs. I use the adjective sweeping for a reason.
Sweeping, okay.
Through my long career, I've seen many times when individual tariffs on, rubber tire grade 4 or chicken part grade 3 helped to offset unfair trade practices, particularly dumping by some of our trading partners. But that's very granular and very targeted. What he's done with the much more sweeping approach is quite economically destructive. And I'm sure the four of us could get into some of the numbers on that. Maybe we should, but I'll call today Liberation Day.
One thing that's interesting in this, just as a framing matter, to me, what's most problematic, maybe politically for him in all this is they've really struck at the heart of his justification for tariffs, right? So they're now going to shift all the much more specific targeted ways in which statutes allow you to do tariffs, on a sectoral basis, on a time-limited basis, that you've got to provide a bunch of justification for. That's not the way he was justifying his deployment of tariffs before. It was he would look at a trade surplus or imbalance as he saw it between us and our trading partners, and he would view that as a justification in and of itself for tariffs. And that's exactly what they've just struck down. They basically said categorically, you can't do that. So now he's going to have to shift to a completely different set of justifications that are allowed for in statute, which are not what his justifications have been thus far. So the pivot here, I assume Treasury's been working now for months on shifting to all these more targeted bases, because we've sort of seen this coming, at least at a
USTR probability.
The USTR, fair enough. But I mean, the whole lot of them surely have come up with the alternative, the pivot here. But
they must have a package ready to go.
Completely different, away from the grounds on which they've been justifying it all along, which is kind of interesting.
They must have a package that's ready to go.
Yeah.
Is it possible that the president decides not to respond? I mean, think about affordability. I mean, we all know that the tariffs are undermining affordability. It's raising prices for the things that people need. Food, apparel, furniture, we import all that stuff. And so couldn't he just say, look, I respect he won't use the word respect, but I'm going to let the Supreme Court stand for the moment, but I'm coming back. We're going to do tariffs, but we're not doing them right. We're not doing them right now.
It's a really great point you're raising, Mark. And if he were smart, that's exactly what he'd do, except he wouldn't say what you said. What he'd say is, the trade war is over. We won.
Okay. All right.
We won. It's over. I mean, the Supreme Court, those guys are idiots, but, we won. Great. It's over. And, that's that. And that would help him tremendously in the affordability space. But I don't know, what odds would others put on that? I'd say 15%.
So you think he's going to come out and say, look, these guys, they're wrong, they're idiots. I'm going to impose tariffs, but based on sectoral tariffs, some other legal justification. And then
I think he's going to say, in so many words, we were afraid that these idiots would get it wrong. This day would come. Here's the program we've been working on as a contingency.
Got it. So we're not going to get any relief here. Yeah, that's certainly our baseline. That's what we have in our forecast. Hey, just one sidebar. Did you notice we now have all the trade data in for 2025? The trade deficit in 2025 was no different than it was in 2024. So despite all the tariffs and all the things this is going to bring in the deficit, now, I mean, I think we're within a few $1 billion of what we had last year.
Wow. The one thing I would say about that is that the country by country composition of the trade deficit is a little different, which is also interesting. So there's less China and there's a lot more Vietnam and Mexico.
Well, let me just say there's less direct China. There's less direct China.
Exactly. Well said. Yeah. There's a lot of China through Vietnam and Mexico, but it's
right. It's just, it's a whack-a-mole kind of thing, I think. But while we're on the topic, have you been following this New York Fed piece that was written about the tariffs and the pass-through to consumers and businesses? Did that get on your radar screen? Did you see the reaction from Kevin Hassett, the head of the?
I had the Streisand effect. You know the Streisand effect? Are you familiar with that phrase? I can't remember. Yes, but
okay.
I can't remember. Chris, do you know how to define it? But what it means is that you say, I can't remember what happened. I think somebody might have said like, Barbra Streisand's album is terrible, so everybody went and listened to the Barbra Streisand album.
Right.
So, but it's something like that. So the Streisand effect is Kevin Hassett made everybody go read this paper, and I read it. Yeah, it's very good. I mean, it's very straightforward. It's very mechanical. These papers all find the same thing. So yeah.
Yeah, and just so the listener knows, because I'm sure many people haven't read. Now they'll go out and they'll read it, but and it's not a long piece, and it's not that complicated.
No,
basically. 95% of the tariffs have been passed through to American business and or consumer. They didn't make a distinction at that, who's paying for this, the business through the lower profit margins or consumers through higher prices. But, the bulk of these tariffs almost all of the tariffs have been passed through. And of course, that's not the message that the administration wanted to hear. But anyway, so, okay, well, let's move forward. Unless anything else, Chris, did you want to say anything else about the tariffs?
I guess in terms of the reaction, I agree that I don't think the administration is just going to let this lie, but maybe they don't go back 100%, right? Maybe they have the package and they only introduce a few of the tariffs just to send a signal while still having the affordability play out more favorably. Is that I know it's a middle ground,
or take their time.
Take their
time. Because we need to, do all the things that we need to do to get it through the process.
Well, some of the tariffs require time anyway, right? If they go with Section 201 or 301, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. All right. Well, let's turn to the economic data. And again, going back to drinking from a fire hose, the other thing that happened this morning is we got a lot of data, GDP data. Chris, did you want to just give us your rundown on that those GDP numbers? And I saw Jared, I am an avid fan of your Substack. I read your piece before we went on, and I just want to say you have my credit card number. So anytime you want to turn on the spigot, I'm there.
Wow,
I love that. Thank you. Hold on, I gotta go press a few buttons. And,
that's right. Exactly. Yeah, it's well worth it. But Chris, you want to go down
so much.
Run over the numbers?
Sure. So main event was perhaps the GDP number that came out today for the fourth quarter of 2025, and it came in lower than expectations, 1.4% on an annualized basis for the quarter. Right, so well below some of the GDP Now models or other forecasts that the consensus had. A lot of it is attributable to the government shutdown, right? So that subtracted about a percentage point from that growth. So if you added that back in, or part of that back in, you'd have something that is still decent growth. And the growth rate for the year at 2.2%, that's Q4 to Q4, also kind of in line, slower than what we've seen in the previous couple of years, but still kind of chugging along at a decent clip. I don't think we would, dispute it or not find it favorable. I don't know if you want to stop there and go to GDP or continue on GDP, or do you want to go to PCE? Or
well, let's just stop there. So we got 1.4% annualized in Q4, well below expectations. I think Atlanta Fed, they have a tracker which estimates current quarter GDP based on all the monthly data flow. Last I looked, they were at 3%. We were at 2.4%, and the consensus was, I think, around 2.4, 2.5, something like that. And then for the year 2.2, Jared, I saw your Substack, and the word you used was a good economy, or two words, good economy. And Is that how you feel about the GDP numbers?
What I wrote this morning, and I felt it, really pretty strongly. There's a ton of data to absorb this morning, and I was doing it very fast, very early. I'm out here on the West Coast with some pretty strong coffee, so maybe I'm a little bit, I'm feeling a little more inspired than quantitative, so I apologize in advance. I think what we have is a fundamentally good economy that's being incessantly smacked around by horrible policy. And at this point, thus far, the economy's winning the fight. But that could change. Whether it's tariffs, which, very topical, deportations, the government shutdown. I mean, Cris told you that you could be looking at a report that was well north of 2 instead of 1.4, but for the shutdown. All of these factors, Jim, I'd be interested in your take on some of this, in the housing sector, which has been laid low. All of these factors have been, really quite problematic headwinds, yet the tailwind of strong consumer, strong investment, and even maybe faster productivity has thus far, won that fight. But we're still, we have a lot more rounds to go.
And Jim, we're going to come back to housing in just a second, but just to push back on that, I have this increasing problem of when we conflate the words GDP and economy. GDP is one measure of the economy, and I'd say I wouldn't characterize it as good. 2.2 for Q4 to Q4, because I use that because it abstracts from the ups and downs and all arounds and the quarterly data, which are being whipped around by the tariffs and the trade flows. 2.2, it's okay. It's maybe economy's potential, maybe at best the economy, maybe a little bit below the economy's potential because unemployment
I think it probably
has
is,
pushed up over the past year. So I wouldn't characterize that as good. And then I look at the job market and I say that's definitely not good. I mean, we're not creating any jobs. We haven't since Liberation Day back, the real Trump's Liberation Day back in April of 2025. You go back and take a look, even with the January increase in employment, we've gone nowhere on jobs, and any jobs we've gotten is in one sector of the economy and healthcare. So that's nothing that to me doesn't feel like good at all. That feels like, vulnerable. And then I look at the inflation numbers. We got that today too. The PCE, consumer expenditure inflator, came in 3%. That's a full percentage point over the Fed's target of 2, and what we all would consider to be comfortable. And I say that's bad. So, and then I say, okay, we're looking at these aggregate statistics. Lift the hood up and take a look around. The folks that are driving the train are the folks that the reason why we're getting that consumer spending is not because of middle income Americans or low income Americans. They're barely holding on. It's the high income guys who are drawing down their saving rate to be able to spend. And by the way, they can't continue to draw down the saving rate. That takes you only so far. And right now the saving rate is 3.6%. That's about as low as it ever gets. So just to push back, Jared, I bristle when I hear the word good and the economy. It just doesn't feel right to me. No?
No, I don't think that's right. I think you're way too depressing, which is unusual because I usually find you pretty upbeat, but you're just bumming me out over here. Look, you make a critically important point, which is the economy. I was talking about the macro economy, and you kind of were too, but then you took it down sort of to the more micro level, and there I'm with you 100%. I worry about the K-shaped dynamics. I worry that when we're talking about GDP, it means very little to a lot of people who are struggling. And look, I sort of have two lives. One is a macroeconomist looking at the top line, macro indicators and trying to understand them. And a more sort of heartfelt one, which is, in the affordability space, living standards, trying to help reconnect the growing economy to the livelihoods of middle and lower income people. And I think that disconnection looms very large. So in that sense, I really agree with you. I think a lot of people are getting left behind. But unemployment is 4.3%. That's on the low side. It is true that, the job market's not creating any jobs. It's not laying off people. So I'm glad to see that we're not, I don't see us in anything like a recession right now because you can't have a recession without layoffs. Population growth has been really slow. Labor force growth has been really slow. And that means to get to what you said, an important thing, you said potential may be even higher than 2-ish% because we've been around 2 and unemployment's gone up. So let's say potential is 2.5 or north of that. That's got to be almost all productivity growth, just based on the arithmetic. So it seems like productivity has accelerated. I don't think that's AI yet. I have some thoughts about what it might be, but that's the elixir. That's the holy grail for economists. You know, if we're actually into some faster productivity growth, that means that at least the potential for higher living standards is out there, you know, waiting to be much better distributed thanks to good policy versus crap policy, which is what, as I've said, we have.
Yeah, I on the productivity point, I'm not sure we're there yet. It feels like we're still around 2, and we've got some labor force growth. I mean, we have to wait and see. We need that data from.
What's your potential growth rate right now?
I think it's between 2.25 and 2.5. I mean, the actual growth rate's a little over 2, and we're probably 2.25, 2.5. And of that, 2% is. And by the way, 2%, if that's non-farm business productivity, that's the average rate of productivity growth since World War II. You know.
Well, that's still, it's about a half. So I was thinking more we were at 1.5, 1.7 before, so that's a meaningful acceleration on productivity.
Oh, yeah. No, it's
and let me say this. Yeah. I have a friend, I haven't checked this. A friend sent me a calculation this morning that said actually GDP growth.
Was it Jim?
Yeah, it wasn't Jim. Chris, this is maybe up your alley, so see if these numbers work. He said that take out the government shutdown, and that since in I don't remember the last couple of years, that underlying GDP growth's been around 2.5%, which sounds about right if you take out the shutdown. And and unemployment has ticked up maybe a 1/4 point since then. So if you do the Oken arithmetic, that would tell you that potential's around 3%. I think that's kind of high, but
now, maybe last year in 24, 2 years ago, that's because you had all that labor force growth because of the supply, from immigration coming in.
So anyway, I'll tell you, look, these are fuzzy numbers. So, if it's 2.5 or a little north of 2.5, who knows? But I maintain that, especially given the absolute headwinds of absolute horrific policy, I think we're in, a pretty good macro place. But yeah.
Well, look, the one talking about depressing is housing, Jim. I know you're going to be at the Harvard Joint Center meeting in D.C. Early next week. I'm going to be speaking there as well, and I was going over my talk because I'm going to talk about the outlook for the economy and housing. And it's hard to be upbeat about housing, isn't it? I mean, is there any reason to not continue to be very concerned about the housing market?
Yeah, I mean, the problems that have been sort of hanging over the housing market now for years, mainly a supply shortfall, but also, rates making matters worse as well. There's just little reason to see anything meaningful on the horizon changing any of that. I mean, even if rates come down, you're going to see a little bit of the rate lock phenomenon ease up, and you'll see, refi boom, and the parts of the market that are adequately served with supply will begin to open up a little bit. But the parts of the market that we've been most concerned about, the entry level part of the market in particular, is still just dramatically undersupplied, and there's just no policy that I've seen, at least on the horizon, that one should have any hope would unlock that. There's a fair amount of talk on the Hill about things that might happen, but even if they did happen, they're pretty modest. We can talk about that in a bit. And they really wouldn't take effect for a couple of years anyway in any meaningful way. That is, if you made the policy measures that are being considered, they might affect the economics of development, that are on the table right now. That is, considerations of what you might develop and where, which means you might have more supply as a result of this in like 2 years. So the underlying structural problem we've got, which is a lack of supply in certain market segments, it remains binding, and there's very little to see on the horizon that's going to change that. So I worry that even as if we see rates ease up, and the mortgage-related affordability challenges ease up a little bit. The underlying structural problem that's led to high rents and high home prices hasn't gone anywhere. It's no better now than it was when we all started, bitching and moaning about this like 3 or 4 years ago. It's exactly the same. And so I worry that we'll all get excited about the sugar high of rates coming down, and then we'll wake up from that and realize, oh shit, none of the structural stuff's been fixed. So I'm concerned about it for sure.
Can I ask Jim a question, Mark?
Sure. Go ahead. Fire away.
So when I listen to you talk about this, which it all resonates, unfortunately, the structural problem, which you're putting at the root of this correctly, I mean, is that kind of near term unsolvable? Is that like not something you could really do anything about in the near term? I'm sort of asking, I guess what I'm kind of getting at is if you could wave a wand and do something that might help people with housing quickly, is there anything you could do? Is that wand wave?
Yeah, I mean, if the diagnosis that the structural problem we're talking about is a lack of adequate supply in certain market segments. So if you think that it's true that the main structural problem is not enough entry-level homes for purchase and not enough workforce rental housing, if that's your view. And when Mark and Cris and I did this paper a while back, that's roughly what we found.
And just define workforce housing again, just so.
Rental housing that is one step up from subsidized housing. So sort of middle class housing that cops and firefighters and teachers would likely take advantage of. So we're not, the supply shortfall is not as dramatic at the bottom of the market where we've already got subsidies in play. There is a shortfall, but it's not as dramatic. There's no shortfall at the top of the rental market. That's, we've had plenty of supply there all along. The shortfall on the rental side is right there in the middle because there's no policy subsidy and the market can't reach down that far. The math doesn't work for them. And then on the ownership side, it's really the bottom of the ownership market, which is kind of where the middle class enters the market. So it's that part of the market that is undersupplied. And the problem is, even if you were to wave a magic wand today, it means that more stuff likely gets built over the next several years, which means that supply constraint gets eased in, say, 18 months. So I mean, maybe Mark disagrees, but I don't know of a magic wand solution that is a within the next 6 months kind of solution, at least to the supply shortage. Everything's an 18-month out kind of solution.
Hey, Jim, the one positive thing, though, is there was a piece of legislation that's gotten through the legislative process, right, here on the housing, which is bipartisan. I mean, I don't know if there's any other legislation that's gotten through. So obviously policymakers are focused on it.
It's worth talking about that a little bit. So you've got packages in the House and in the Senate that are, to their credit, very supply side focused. They are the wonkiest, least politically, motivating, inspiring packages one could ever imagine, which I'll come back to in a minute. But they are getting at the minutia in government that is holding back supply. The policies at HUD that have been around forever that cut the wrong way, and they're sort of fiddling with the dials of bureaucracy in a way that will make the bureaucracy a bit more of a tailwind to supply rather than a headwind. So it's both packages are useful. The Senate's package is a little more aggressive than the House, but either one would be really helpful to have. So they are, my sense is, going to make it through their respective chambers probably in the spring, early spring. And then the question is going to be, how do the two sides reconcile inconsistent packages? Does the House accept the Senate or vice versa? Answer is probably no. So you're going to wind up with the two sides having to come up with some sort of hybrid that can then pass both chambers. And the upside to that is what's likely to happen is you're going to have a window when the two sides are negotiating where other things can get added to the mix. It's not too late since these bills, neither one of these bills will be the bill that is ultimately passed by both chambers. So there still is an opportunity to put other things on the train, as it were. And my guess is the politics in a midterm election year are ruthless enough on housing affordability that they feel compelled to do something. One question is where Trump weighs in on this. He's been pretty quiet on which package he prefers. but it may be dispositive. If he weighs in heavily on one side or the other, that may make a big difference. So yeah, there is cause for optimism in Congress that they will do something. But even if those packages get passed, they're pretty incremental, and they would take a long time to make it into the bloodstream of development.
Yeah, there's no game changer there. I mean, they're all, but they're moving directionally. It feels right, and certainly different than what the president himself has offered up, mostly on the demand side of the equation.
Yeah, so that's super interesting. So what the president's done is he has.
Chris, can I just point out to Chris? Do you see how Jim says that's every time I say something, he says that's interesting. That's so interesting. You see how? He does that?
Maybe I'm being ironic. And
what he should really say is that's interesting to me.
Exactly. Yeah.
So well, the reason why this particular comment is interesting is the president.
To me.
It's very the president's positioning on this stuff at one level has been very confusing. So he has said back as early as the early fall, we've got an affordability crisis. He even said he was going to declare a housing affordability state of emergency, and with a big package that would be adequate to addressing the emergency. And so there was a lot of throat clearing and drum rolling going on with the White House around housing back in the fall. His policy team behind the scenes went and developed a package that they presented to him that was the kind of supply side stuff that you'd want to see. And Trump, being the political mastermind that he is, saw all the stuff on the list and was like, God, nobody's going to care about any of this stuff. And so very quietly, the housing declaration, emergency declaration, sort of went away. It was never declared, so we didn't see a package, rise up to meet it. And it's because Trump realized, and his pollsters realized, that the sorts of things that you need to do to address the housing affordability crisis aren't all that politically resonant. If you look at polling, it's remarkable and horribly depressing. A few weeks ago, polling came out that had that like 9 in 10 likely voters think housing affordability is a pressing concern. So it's off the charts high. But in that same poll, roughly only a quarter of those polled think that supply is one of the main drivers of the affordability crisis. Half think that it's all about rates. A third think that it's about greedy investors vacuuming up all the supply. And half of those polled think we don't need more supply. They don't want more homes on their block. They don't want more density. So if you're the president or his pollsters and you see those numbers and you see, okay, well, we got to do something because 9 in 10 folks think we need to do something. And then you pivot to what your policy people tell you. You got to build more stuff. And then you go down further in the pollsters list and you realize that none of the stuff your policy people tell you needs to happen polls very well. Well, it creates a mess. And so Trump has been channeling that mess kind of ever since. He channels the 9 in 10 number and says, we got to do something, and says, we're going to do something. And then he turns and channels the populist nature of what people want, which is demand side stuff, demand side help, or beating up on private equity firms, not so much building more supply. So you've got this kabuki dance going on where the administration yells and screams about housing affordability, as they should. But then when they pivot to solutions, they're trying to channel the polling numbers, and it just doesn't lead you down a very useful path. So as a result, he's really only announced 2 things on housing affordability, despite all this throat clearing about the level of gravity of the issue. It's bringing down mortgage rates modestly by buying up MBS, which we can talk about if you want. And it's banning investors of any sort of significant size from buying up single family stock to rent it out. Like, those are the only 2 things he suggested. And not surprisingly, they poll higher than anything else on the list. So that's what he's gone with. But if you did both of them, it would have, a marginal impact.
Next. Yeah.
You forgot about the 50-year mortgage.
Yeah, but even that lasted 24 hours.
Yeah.
Like, he came out with that because he listened to his FHFA director, perhaps for the last time. And when he realized that wasn't as wonderful an idea as the FHFA director seemed to suggest, he threw the FHFA director under the bus in like 2 news cycles. So,
well, we've talked about the weakest, in my view, perspective, the weakest part of the economy, housing. Let's talk about the strongest part of the economy. And Jared, you kind of alluded to it in terms of business investment in AI. It feels like AI is powering a lot of what we're seeing on the investment side of the equation. That's data centers and power and chips and all that kind of stuff. I'd like to get your take on, do you view AI as a friend or a foe, at this point? I mean, friend in the sense that it's driving a lot of investment spending. It is raising, if it hasn't raised productivity growth, it feels like it's on the cusp of doing so. But is it foe?
Yeah, I would call it a dangerous. I feel like it's a dangerous friend. It's like
dangerous
a
friend.
really, I used to know this guy. I won't name him, but he's renowned. Who's like multi-billionaire, and every once in a while he would pull me in. He's a tech dude, and he would like, hey, let's go out, and there'd be, he'd have the back room of a fancy restaurant, and the bill would be like outrageously high, and wine would be flowing, and it was interesting, but it felt sort of like not a great place for me to be. I want to be very clear that this had nothing to do with, this was not an island somewhere. This was, this is just a tech guy who's, so, that, and that seems kind of like a relevant connection. AI has real promise, just like this guy is blazingly smart and innovative, but there are excesses and dangers therein. And so I worry that AI is in a financial bubble. And I can talk about that. I think it's spinning off some not just investment effects, as you mentioned, but wealth effects as well. So the idea that, if you have numerous hundreds of billions in terms of appreciated equity from tech stocks and AI, for every dollar that your portfolio goes up, the research suggests you maybe spend 2 cents more. And so that's helping to power consumer spending, and it's also probably behind some of your K-shaped results, Mark, where you see the upper end consuming more aggressively than the bottom end. But that bubbles can burst, and when they do, that can have negative macroeconomic impacts. And then, of course, people, we all worry about the possibility of AI displacing workers versus complementing workers, being a substitutable factor instead of a complementary one. And there we've seen, not that much yet, but I think we're seeing some outer edges of that. I wonder if the low hiring in particular is employers saying, well, let's just see how many people this technology can replace. And they don't quite know yet. So, nervous, but, as a user of it, it's remarkable. And, mind blowing on, every week I find something, really to expand my thinking around this. So mixed bag.
Yeah. So a dangerous friend. I like the way you characterize it. Cris, we're coming. By the way, we're coming out with a study next week, a white paper on AI, and look at different scenarios and attach different probabilities to it. It's been a lot of fun, really interesting. And I will, just one interesting point. We have these 4 different scenarios. I won't go through them. We'll take too much time. But we asked Claude, Cris fed the paper to Claude and said, hey, Claude, what do you think the probabilities of these scenarios are? Kind of a sanguine baseline, job dystopia, productivity boon, bubble burst, those kinds of things. And Cris, who was Claude most consistent with in terms of the probabilities?
Well, it was you.
Yeah. And I had
if you are who you say you are.
A very flat distribution, to the point that saying basically, I really don't know. Therefore, the tails are pretty fat here on either side, on the upside or on the downside. But Cris, what would you say, friend or foe? Is AI in the near term, in 2026, 2027, friend or foe?
It's a good friend.
Good,
but not a great friend, right?
Not a great friend.
So I think we're going to fall short of some of the expectation. Or to Jared's point, the market is expecting miraculous growth instantaneously. I just don't see that coming. So I think we'll see some shortfalls in terms of earnings reports or expectations. The incremental improvement in the models is getting smaller, right? There's some marginal impacts here. So I suspect that we'll get some gains, but they won't be quite as lofty as what investors are expecting. And so I expect that we'll see some pullback in terms of the investments and stock prices as well. So a good friend. It's helpful, but not this great friend who's going to really power things to a whole other level.
Jim, do you have a view on this?
It seems like it's going to be lumpy. It seems like what will happen is some sectors will wake up and realize, holy smokes, we'll be able to jump ahead, 50 years in development because of this. And others will realize that their sector just doesn't lend itself to the kind of advantage that AI has. And the market will sort of pick up on that along with the models. And so we'll see a very lumpy kind of impact on this, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway,
I have a particular, Mark, if I can share a particular concern I have that I think would resonate with the group. This actually comes from the work of Joseph Briggs, who's done very nice work on AI.
That's great.
He worries, or at least I shouldn't say I worry. He says he's sort of a data guy.
He's Goldman Sachs. He's a Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, he's a Goldman Sachs, and he sort of outlines a scenario. He says that history says the following: that recession is a force multiplier for technological displacement. Mm-hmm. Recession is a force multiplier, meaning so that, as I said, I think there are a lot of employers who are trying to figure out how many workers can I avoid hiring because of AI, and they don't know the answer yet. You go into a downturn, you lay off, 5-10% of your staff or something. Now you're asking your question, how many of these folks can I avoid hiring back? And apparently there's an interaction between recession and technological displacement that can be pretty negative. So to me, the stakes of a downturn, which are always high, may be even higher now because of that interaction.
I think that's an excellent point. I think that was the history of the internet boom, right? Because if you go back, that was a decade, 1995 to 2005. The first half of that decade, you saw some productivity gains, but a lot of job growth. In fact, unemployment declined throughout that period. Then you had the bubble burst in 2000, and then by 2000, and then 9/11, of course. You had a recession, and that's when you saw the big productivity gains. That's when all the productivity gains occurred. It was in the early 2000s, and I think it is because of that force multiplier effect that you're talking about. Yeah, very interesting point.
I'd argue that the productivity gains we're experiencing today recently are from the pandemic, right? That there were changes that were adopted during the pandemic. We're working online, remote work,
occupational upgrading.
I think that's what we're experiencing. This has nothing to do with the AI effect just yet. So,
well, we're going to lose Jared here in a few minutes, and so maybe I thought we'd end the conversation this way. Can you? We'll go around the group, and can you identify the one thing that makes you? And maybe we've already talked about it, but if not, maybe there's other ways of thinking about this. What is the one thing that makes you most nervous about the economic outlook in 2026? Or you want to take the other side of that?
No, I'm going to say I can. Are you asking me?
Yeah, first you, Jared. Yep.
So I'll say the one thing, but luckily for me, the one thing implies two things, and that would be stagflation. So stagflation, which is, pretty good outcomes on the growth. Weak outcomes on the growth side, but pressure on the price side, right? And those are supposed to be negatively correlated, so that if you have weaker growth, you have less of inflationary concerns. So what I worry about is really in a specific type of stagflation, because I've already been sort of kvelling, to use a Yiddish word, which means, applauding the pretty good, GDP and productivity growth. I worry about the job, stagnant job market and pressures on prices. I think I have a lot of faith in the Federal Reserve. I think Jay Powell's been a tremendously effective chair, but I feel like they're almost a little underworried about inflationary pressures. And remember, I wear the trauma of being in the Biden administration in 21, 22. So perhaps I'm battle scarred in a way that's has a confirmation bias or something. But I worry that, and you look at this morning's inflation numbers, look at the graph I put on my Substack. You see real, you see stickiness, you see some acceleration, and not just in goods, but in services, which shouldn't, arguably have that much to do with the tariffs. So I'm worried about inflationary pressures, and I'm worried about that the low hire, low fire in the job market could become low fire, higher. I'm sorry, low hire, high fire.
Well, this is going to be the name of the podcast. That's going to be the
Yeah.
podcast name. Yeah, right there.
Yeah. So, we have low hire, low fire. I worry about low hire, high fire. Moving to a layoff scenario with inflationary, and that's the stagflation concern.
Got it. What, Chris? What's your most pressing concern?
I'd point to concentration risks, right? We talked about spending and the concentration of households, the disparity we see there, and the economy's has been carried by that top 20% of households, really tied to the stock market. If things turn around and they pull back, I think that's fodder for recession right there, right? Because the middle and the bottom are not providing a whole lot of support. And then we have concentration in investment as well, as we talked about with AI. We're really placing all our chips on that technology at the expense of other technologies that we could be investing in. Maybe not as dramatic in terms of their impact, but I worry that if AI doesn't pay off as we expect, that could lead to a pretty significant pullback in investment as well.
Right.
A quick concentration question for Chris. Do you also worry about the fact that so much job growth has been concentrated in a few narrow sectors?
Absolutely, right. It's healthcare, right? It's really been driven by healthcare over the last year. And healthcare is great. Those are good jobs, but again, a little shaky on the foundation, right? We don't have anything else to fall back on, right? That's really been carrying the water. So, yeah, absolutely.
We're not going to play the stats game because we just don't have time. But I've got one stat, and I want to ask you, who can get this in the context of this point about healthcare. Which metropolitan area with more than 3 million in population? There's 25 or 26 metropolitan areas with over 3 million in population. Of that group, which has had the strongest job growth over the past year, December 24 to December 25? Percentage change.
Which city you're saying?
Which metropolitan area? Which city? Yeah. Think about what we were just talking about. Healthcare.
Pittsburgh
you got to read my Philadelphia Inquirer op-ed this week, or opinion piece this week. It's Philadelphia.
Wow.
Philadelphia is the strong in terms of job creation. December to December, 2024 to 25. Philly is the strongest growing economy in the country. More than Dallas, more than Atlanta, more than Phoenix, and the reason. Healthcare, I think the largest employers are the University of Pennsylvania, which is all healthcare. Tom Jefferson, Temple, CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Those are the massive employers in Philly. And actually, that's why the state of Pennsylvania is one of the strongest growing states in the country. Anyway, just a sidebar. So to you, Jim, what would you say? What is the thing that makes?
I worry more about Trump risk than anything else. It's a nebulous sort of thing, but the market's been remarkably not resistant, but as Jared put it, durable through all this crazy policy and personality risk. But I just worry that at some point it's going to give in some way in the face of some rash move that the bond market doesn't like. I also worry internationally. So far, the sheer fear of Trump has kept people from really pushing back in ways that affect us too much economically. There are signs that maybe the fever may break and people may begin to call his bluff. And I wonder whether or not they'll do it in a way that will impact the economy. So it's a nebulous bucket and maybe too easy an answer, but I worry that at some point in the next 2 years, as Trump gets more isolated in his power, divided Congress, internationally, people less deferential, if he gets backed into a corner in a way that ultimately bites us economically or otherwise, I worry about that more than anything else.
I think that's a really powerful risk. as you were saying, literally as you were saying that, Jim, this headline came over my transom, and this gets to Mark's question. What do you think Trump will do with the tariff decision? Breaking news: Trump says he's considering a limited strike on Iran.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's been percolating, but what do presidents do when they want to, make you look over here, look over, they bomb? And so, I think Jim is right on, spot on there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to answer my own question this way. My son sent me this this X post from someone on X that encapsulates it perfectly for me. Here's the post. I honestly have no idea if we are close to a crash, a melt-up, World War III, an AI industrial revolution, a mother of all short squeezes, a depression, a recession, or aliens. That's exactly how I feel. I've been at this for a long time. 35 years I've been a professional economist. And I'll have to say, there have been other times when I've been as uncertain as now, but there are very few of them. There was Y2K, there was 9/11, there's a GFC, the global financial crisis, the pandemic. And I'll have to say now, because the uncertainty created by economic policy is off the charts, and the economic uncertainty created by artificial intelligence is off the charts. I mean, you listen to some of these, Jared, you're right, these technologists in that space are just amazingly brilliant people, and you can't dismiss them. But if you listen to them, you come away with, oh my gosh, there's a tsunami headed straight for us, and no one's paying attention to it. So, that's what makes me most worried, is that when I look at the economic outlook and look at the scenarios that can unfold, it's a very flat distribution. It's not this bell-shaped thing with the risks on the tails. It's like these are fat tails. They're all on both sides of the distribution. So it just, I'll have to tell you, I feel so uncomfortable with how things are going, and just because they're just all over the place. Anyway, what do you think? Was that one?
So
Wasn't that a great X post?
That is a great tweet, and I'd love you to send me that link, please, because I want to use that.
I will.
But I do have
next Substack title.
Yeah.
Well, I do have one question about that, though. So there's a very good and I think kind of well-developed and sort of true theory in economics about the option value of waiting, the real option value of waiting. And what it says is that in periods of uncertainty, it makes sense for investors to wait and see where things land before they jump in. And therefore, uncertainty should be correlated with weak investment, slower growth, and less capital deepening. So like for all the uncertainty you just outlined, and it was a perfect thing, it's like, and yet investors are not tapping the option value of waiting. They're jumping in like full bore, which is part of your concern. Like, why aren't people kind of standing back? And Jim is right about Trump risk. So why wouldn't you be standing back saying, well, let's see where this plays out? But there's this kind of weird combination of the flat probability distribution you described and aggressive risk taking.
But it seems like there are two possible explanations, which scares me to death. One is, and I agree with everything you just said, 100%, and I find it bewildering.
Would you agree with Jared or with me, Jim?
No, Jared, the notion, well, I agree about aliens and all that too. It scares me. I'm equally unnerved and confused by all of it. But Jared's point about the markets, the disconnection between all of that uncertainty, all of that apparent risk, and the market's enthusiasm is just bewildering. And it seems like there are one of two explanations. One is they view themselves to be insulated from these risks in some way. That is, they're okay with them somehow. In which case, if we have more of them, so what? The markets keep going up. Or they're ignorant of them, willfully or otherwise. And if the latter's true, then, when those risks go from being probabilities to being actualities, you're going to have inflection points. You'll have these nonlinear reactions where the market's going to go bananas because they're going to feel like they got caught off guard by something that's always been a 30% probability that, jumps up to become an actuality. I worry a little bit that we're kind of in the latter world, and then there's just this willful ignorance of the risks. And when one of them actually comes to bear, people are going to wake up and realize sort of just how risky the environment we're in is, and they're going to head for the hills.
Jim, this reminds me of a radio play I've always wanted to do, and this might be a good closeout because it's supposed to be humorous, and it ties together a lot of what we've been talking about, including aliens. So imagine that, here's a radio scenario I could imagine. You're driving, I hear the radio. Aliens attacked the world today. Airplanes were falling out of skies. Buildings were burning. Populations were destroyed. Markets were upbeat on the news based on...
That's because the Fed's going to ease policy.
Exactly.
Right. It means lower rates.
Oh, that's great. I think we should close out on that. That was really very well put. So I want to thank you guys for spending the morning with us. Really appreciate it. Covered a lot of really good ground, and always enjoyed it. Hopefully I can get back on at some future date. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Great seeing you all.
To you, dear listener, thank you for your attention, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care now.